Good afternoon. It is a real pleasure to be here. Since my early times at the University of El Salvador in Argentina, every time I read Hegel, I thought of Gina. I like to start doing exactly what the American professors do. We are trained to tell a joke to ease the environment and make people feel happy before you speech. But the presentation before me made patently clear that energy is a very serious issue. So let me start with two vignettes that they were not in my presentation. In 1991, I was part of a research team in Mozambique, and Mozambique was the poorest country in the world at the time. So we were investigating the nature of the school system, assuming that the school system will change after the Civil War was ending. Yes, we were in the middle of a civil war. And we visited deep inside Mozambique, but many of the researchers, when they go to developing countries, they sit in the Hilton and talk to their friends and then come back with an answer. We went into the field. And the first thing I learned is that when we landed inside Mozambique, very deep inside the forest, the pilot said to us, well, tomorrow morning when we leave, we'll have enough fuel to reach the next airport. And I said, why so? Well, people don't have ways to cook, so they will steal our fuel, but they will be kind enough to leave us enough so we can land in the next airport, which of course we did that because from a frantic moment in the air, we keep calling whoever was in charge of the American interest in that particular next city so they could keep open the airport because the airport will close at 6 and there was no way we'll get it there at 6. The second vignette was even worse because when we were in the city, we visited the school and the school was remarkably active, but there was one thing missing. There was not a single seat, not a single chair, not a single table, nothing. Nothing that was of wood existed. So I asked, why is this so? And they said, well, the community is always looking after the school and so on. I said, but there's no money for chairs. Oh, yes, there was. But there is no trees around here and there is no way to cook. So the community at 9 will come and take one by one all the items that have value, particularly wood. The children were sitting on the ground, the teacher was sitting on the ground, and I was astounded. So let me start with my actual written speech. The International Year of Global Understanding was proclaimed by international science councils. And why are we, in this moment, advocating for the International Year of Global Understanding, brought to life by the powerful writings and practical initiative of Professor Dr. Benno Verlin from Friedrich-Schiller University in Jena? We may find some clues to answer this question in the work of cultural critic George Santayana. In his book, The Life of Reason, Introduction and Reason in Common Sense, Santayana provides us with two useful proverbs. First, and most famously, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. Learning about the past in a moving world will help to change, or what Santayana called readaptation is the price for longevity. I gave you these two proverbs intimately related to the question of understanding. So, what do we need understanding? Any scientist may argue that we produce knowledge, and knowledge implies understanding, because understanding searches for the roots of things, their evolution, and their outcomes. So, it will not be a surprise that key international scientific and humanistic councils proclaim understanding to be a central principle of science and humanity, and to be crucial for the survival of all of us and our planet, not just for the survival of the fittest. In this keynote, I want to undertake the question of understanding from an existentialist and a very personal perspective. So I will speak first of the fundamental dynamics of human life. In the second part of my presentation today, I will address, in the same vein, the importance of understanding for the survival of democracy, the planet, human civilizations on Earth. So let's start with a literary presentation. Usually when people speak about science, they forget about literature, and I think it's wrong. Having been exiled from Argentina by a dictatorship that annihilated 30,000 of its own citizens and caused an Argentinian diaspora of 100,000 more, and of course now you are discovering that while the German accent always plays a role in every presentation, the Argentinian accent could be worse, particularly for somebody like me that learned English at the age of 30 when I was exiled. I have learned that there were three fundamental dynamics of human life: love, death, and madness, which are each involved in many wonderful as well as perfidious ways with two other dynamics: memory and power. Love is a concept that has fascinated human beings from the beginning of time. Psychoanalysis, and particularly Freud, consider love and religion to be an illusion, a pathological romantic idealization. Others, from different schools of psychoanalysis or philosophy, like Deleuze, think otherwise. Deleuze explains that for him, the dialectics of love and desire is the simple thing in the world. I cannot agree more. Love and desire are part of our inner soul. We love and search for love so that we can be loved. We crave, we want, we long for love. Most religions make love for God, and by implication love for our neighbors, their foundational premises. Let me move now to the next fundamental dynamic of human life: death. We all know that we have an expiration date, and yet we do not know when it will come, and of course, try to postpone it as much as humanly possible. A doctor in a meeting 6 months ago said publicly, life is an illness that is the product of sex, and it only can be cured by death. I thought it was a bit tremendous statement. But the eventual finishedness of our lives has invited many existentialists and cultural traditions to remember and even to celebrate death in ways that do not fully acknowledge our limits. This past November 2nd was the Day of the Dead, Día de los Muertos in Mexico. A few days later, I was in Mexico City in an event of UNESCO, and I saw the altars dedicated to the Day of the Dead. It seems that life and death are inextricable link to each other because one precedes the other in an inexorable march toward the extinction of the self. Finishedness is the inevitable destiny of human life. But as some philosophers like Freire have cautioned us, our inevitable biological finishedness cannot preclude us from preventing our unfinishedness. This is not a play of words. Let me explain. Freire reminds us in Pedagogy of Freedom that we should consider the unfinishedness of our human condition to be an essential condition. And I quote, I hold that my own unity and identity in regard to others and to the world constitute my essential and unrepeatable way of experiencing myself as a cultural, historical, and unfinished being in the world, simultaneously conscious of my unfinishedness. There is no paradox here. The inevitable biological finishedness of human beings should be coupled with intellectual unfinishness. Learning is the way to experience ourselves as cultural and historical beings. Curiosity is crucial, the ability to understand the result. Learning is the way to readapt to a moving world, as Santayana recommended. The third dynamic at the core of human life is madness. Foucault devoted a great deal of his oeuvre to the history of madness. Much of his work examines the history of societies dealing with deviant behavior. Madness is opposed to reason. Here we have another paradox of interpretation and understanding. And it stands at the end of communication. If I may quote briefly Foucault, quote, "Modern man no longer communicates with the madman. There is no common language, or rather, it no longer exists. The constitution of madness as mental illness at the end of the 18th century bear witness to rupture in a dialogue, given the separation as already enacted and expelled from the memory all those imperfect words of nothing signal, spoken faltering, in which the exchange between madness and reason was carried out. The language of psychiatry, which is a monologue by reason about madness, could only have come into existence in such silence." In brief, we search for love, avoid death to the greatest extent possible, and try not to fall into madness. Love, death, and madness are three dynamics representing the core of human interest, and they should be the central themes in our quest for knowledge and understanding that we celebrate today. Yet, I do not believe we are done exploring these core elements of social action and the unfinishness of human beings. Two other elements require careful attention, but this is not the place to do a scientific analysis of them, only a literary analysis. I'm speaking of memory and power. The rock band Evanescence puts the relationship between understanding and memory in the right light, and I quote from their song, Understanding, and I quote, "You hold the answer deep within your own mind. Consciously, you have forgotten them. That's the way the human mind works. Whenever something is too unpleasant or too shameful for us to entertain, we reject it. We erase it from our memory, but the imprint is always there. Losing our memory is part of the modern condition of madness, resulting from accident, illness, senility, or simply our inability to always remember much of the past or even just what happened the past hour. I would be remiss if I not mention here the celebrated short story of my compatriot who never received the Nobel Prize in Literature because the only reader in the Committee of Spanish never liked him. What a pity. Borges wrote a short story that I strongly recommend to read and reread through the rest of your life. It's called Funes de Memorius. Funes was a gaucho who fell from a horse and hitting his head, he remembered everything, always. Funes, said Borges, remembered everything in exclusively particular detail, but is incapable of abstraction. The rest of us are left largely only with abstraction, without the blessing and curse of complete and precise memories of everything. We use all sorts of tricks to preserve our memory. We use mnemonics and acronyms to help us remember some data, date, name, or a specific task to be accomplished. Calendars remind us of appointments or celebrations like our significant other birthday or a meeting at the office. Memory helps us retrieve skills that we have learned, like riding a bike, years after we learned the skills as children. In neuroscience, there have been many studies of the different types of memory, how we access them, and how they contribute to our sense of self. But once again, when we move from individual to collective experience, the retrieval of collective memories that were suppressed, for instance, by a dictatorship, destroying the life of people in a given society, or by forced silence about harassment that women suffered from men even many years ago, is another instance of the call for knowledge and understanding. Bringing back memories to prevent human rights abuses that otherwise go unanswered is what we seek when we look at acts of genocide and try to identify witnesses to testify from their own memories about what has exactly happened and who did what, how, and when. In analytical psychoanalysis, memory is considered an archetype, perhaps even a myth, connected to the collective unconscious. For other fields, particularly the law, which is a system of rules regulating social action, memory is a powerful weapon in the struggle for testimony towards a better life and for decency and transparency in the social pact that regulates social and individual interests. To conclude this analytical, yet literary presentation, power is everywhere. It is in our actions, in our systems, in the dialectics between agency and structures, in our dreams, in our ability to love and be loved, in the act of living or dying, in the decision to look other away as madmen or madwomen, and in the repression of memories to prevent witness to the truth from challenging the power that be. Global understanding plays a formidable role in these 5 core elements of social action: love, death, madness, memory, and power. Just to mention one example, there is a fundamental role for global understanding towards the prevention of war, and the development of a culture of peace should be a natural outcome of global understanding among nations. Let me now move to the second part of my presentation, global citizenship education and how it relates to global understanding. The attacks of September 11, 2001 changed my life. Watching on television the Twin Towers on fire while working in Finland, I sensed it was a time of trial and tribulation for our civilizations. With my oldest son living only a few blocks from the World Trade Center, this global event also became very personal. As a cathartic way of attempting to grasp the events that transpire, I wrote a letter to my loved ones to say that I have been thinking about and seeking in my own heart the answers to the existential dilemmas that I face. I told them that I was prepared to bet on life, love, and peace. I decided to continue with renewed energy, enthusiasm, and effort my academic work. In these exceptional times, like all times, we need to remember the Latin adage, ad fontes. We need to go back to the sources of our principles and desires. I concluded my letter saying, quote, I have decided to live close to the earth, seeking peace and happiness, and to build things with my bare hands instead of only with my mind. Not only did I increase my commitment to promoting understanding, sustainability, and global citizenship education, but also wanted to be an example by living closer to nature and celebrated life. I wanted to find ways to defend the planet, peace, and people. I moved to a remote property in the mountains of Topanga, where I built a cabin with my own hands. I studied fine woodworking at a community college and built furniture. I planted olive trees and grapevines to make olive oil and wine. I planted organic gardens to grow fresh vegetables. I even kept honeybees to harvest honey. This commitment to planetary citizenship dovetails with the principles and practices I have held since I was a university student, and now in my time as a UCLA professor. I have always struggled to build innovations, but the implementation of the Global First initiative, the GEFI, the first ever educational initiative in the UN system by UN Secretary Ban Ki-moon, opened a new chapter in my own struggle for a better world, and I think a new chapter in the struggle of humanity. A world, in the words of Freire, in which it will be easier to love. The JEFI program identified global citizenship education as a central component of social transformation. Global citizenship education is a resource to enhance education for all and to emphasize quality of education, global peace, sustainability of the planet, and the defense of global commons. I'm convinced that global citizen education is a pillar of sustainable development, as is one of these answers to the challenges affecting global peace, such as growing inequality, global poverty, neoliberal globalization, authoritarian education, and predatory cultures destroying the environment and our planet. In an era of global interconnectedness, the world faces immense challenges as well as opportunities that demand a new education. Do currently educational experiences provide the knowledge, skills, and values necessary to fundamentally understand what is happening in the world? Is education teaching us how global problems impact our lives as well as the life of communities, nations, and our planet? September 11, 2001 should force all of us to seek innovations grounded in a new ethics. This is the background of the creation of the UNESCO Chair on Global Learning and Global Citizenship Education. My sense is that, inspired by the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, we can respond to the world problem. We need to nurture teaching practices, research, theories, and policies that support humanity's struggle for the global commons, human rights, and democracy. I have argued that global citizenship should add value to national citizenship and to the global commons. But what is global commons? I like to invite you to go into the internet next week and look at the Global Commons Review that we just began to publish this year. 2 issues are finished, one in February, the other in October. We are finishing now the website. And you will have there a set of experiences and some theories of what it is to talk about global commons. The global commons, in my analysis, is defined by 3 basic propositions. The first proposition is that the planet is our only home, and we have to protect it through a global citizenship sustainable development education, moving from diagnosis and denunciation into action and policy implementation. Second, the concept of the global commons is predicated on the idea that global peace is an intangible cultural good and a treasure of humanity with immaterial value. Every time I say this, I'm reminded of that conversation in the All Greek Senate, in which a senator stood up and spoke against war with the following ideas. At a time of peace, the children buried the parents. At a time of war, the parents buried the children. I think he got the natural way of life very clearly. Third, the global commons is predicated on the need to find ways that people, who are all equal, can manage to live together democratically in an ever-growing and increasingly diverse world, seeking to fulfill their individual and cultural interests, void of corruption, and exercising their inalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The great question about peace is how we can cultivate the spirit of solidarity across the lines of difference. Global citizenship may help our planet, global peace, and people through its contribution to civic engagement. Global citizenship, in its classical dimensions of knowledge, skills, and values, is here and is here to stay. There is a cosmopolitan imperative of economic equality, welfare, and cultural diversity that may produce individuals who may admire others more for their differences than for their similarities. Conclusion. Global citizenship education based on global commons dovetail nicely with the International Year of Global Understanding and the growing interest by the United Nations, and particularly UNESCO, to integrate sustainability with global citizenship education in school curricula. We realize how important the idea of understanding is to endorse, promote, and support global citizenship innovations, which may change the future of the new generations in many countries of the world. Generations with greater abilities with new technologies, and by implication, a greater potential to grow into a new model of world consciousness and a culture of peace and solidarity. Recently, when I was lecturing in Vietnam, a child asked me in perfect English, and I quote, "I am 11 years old. How can I become a global citizen?" End of quote. Questions from children like that, 11-year-olds, are the reason we are working to implement new models of teaching and learning and to include global citizenship education in the curriculum towards the development of a culture of peace and into a new ethics in the world system. Global citizenship education interwoven with global competencies in the education of children and youth may help to prevent another September 11 in the United States or elsewhere, or a global nuclear hecatomb. Global citizenship education and the International Year of Global Understanding, which I hope will become the International Decade of Global Understanding, are tools of soft power for policymakers, soft power to prevent violent extremism through education, enhance global competences, and hopefully impact world peace, reconciliation, and conflict resolution. Therefore, we need to enhance the visibility of our work to a worldwide audience for innovation-seeking improvements in the global system through civic engagement for diversity and multicultural understanding, sustainability, a culture of peace, and world solidarity. Let me conclude with an invitation to my friend, Professor Dr. Verlin. Why not to coordinate in a book that could be published in my series, Rollers, on critical global citizenship education, some of the most fundamental experiences that the International Year of Global Understanding have developed, and they could be applied to courts. It will be an honor for me as your editor to have you in our series. Thank you very much for this invitation.